From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
1 week to Election Day, and voters are presented with dueling speeches from the presidential candidates. Kamala Harris here in Washington conjuring images of January 6th. Donald Trump in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where schools are closed and protesters are waiting.
We'll have a live report from the National Mall coming up, and we'll discuss Vice President Harris's closing arguments with campaign spokesman Ian Sands.
And we'll be joined on the state of the race in a week full of economic data by Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri with analysis from our political panel.
Thanks for joining us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio, with dueling events at the top of the ticket tonight as former President Trump is set to speak in Allentown, Pennsylvania, following the controversial comments at his weekend rally at Madison Square Garden we told you about, and Vice President Harris giving an address from the Ellipse on the National Mall, the site of Donald Trump's rally on January 6th, 2021. That is where we find Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall right now for an update. Tyler, how's it going?
Yeah, hey, Joe, I'm here in front of the stage where Vice President Kamala Harris will address the nation tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Thousands of supporters have already flocked to the National Mall. They're lined up against these barricades, trying to get as close to the stage as possible, as today marks exactly 1 week until Election Day. Now, you can probably hear there's a concert going on around me. Security is incredibly tight. A lot of Secret Service agencies walking around, doing their patrols, making sure that everybody is staying safe, because the D.C. Chief of Police says that they expect 52,000 people to flock here tonight. On my way in, I start to see these overflow zones that they are setting up for people to go to. Now, in terms of what to expect tonight, you both have been covering this all day on Bloomberg TV, how the Harris campaign is trying to thread this message right between a more optimistic tone while also pointing out that this is the exact spot where former President Donald Trump rallied his supporters on January 6th of 2021 before they stormed the Capitol. We did get some excerpts from Harris's speech tonight. We are expecting her to call President Trump will bring, quote, more chaos and more division. So we'll have to see how she kind of threads that needle between more optimism and also that message, as well as some key issues for voters like the economy, immigration. Harris has repeatedly pulled behind former President Trump when it comes to voter confidence on both those issues. In our Bloomberg News Morning Consult polls, for his part, when Harris takes that stage tonight at 7 p.m., we are expecting former President Trump to hit the stage at his dueling rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live on the scene this evening at the Ellipse. Thank you so much. Now, as Tyler mentioned, President Trump is set to speak in Allentown this evening after rallying supporters in Georgia yesterday, making his case.
We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in American history. With your help, from now until Election Day, we will restore America's promise, and we will take back the nation that we love. November 5th will be the most important day in the history of our country, and together we will make America powerful again.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. So that was Atlanta last night, Wendy. It's on to Allentown tonight, a city in Pennsylvania which notably has a very high Puerto Rican population. Considering it's coming just 2 days after the Madison Square Garden rally in which a comedian joked about Puerto Rico being an island of garbage, should we expect Donald Trump to make an apology this evening?
No, we shouldn't. I don't think in the 9 years that Donald Trump has been on the public stage that he has ever sincerely apologized for anything. They knew who those comedians were. They knew what jokes they tell. They put them up there, and they wanted to rally their base with that. The thing is, you're right. He is going to this town in Pennsylvania that is more than 50% Latino and only 30% white. So his base there are all lining the streets, I understand, with filming it and all of that. But he's going to get up there and face possibly an irritated, if not hostile, crowd. And the city was so concerned about this that, as you mentioned at the top, They closed the schools. And like when we were growing up, they would close the schools so we could go participate in democracy and watch an election happen. They're closing the schools for the children's safety because Donald Trump is in town. And, you know, I think this, the rally and sort of all the things that we saw, just the bold racism just out there and misogyny just laid out there, could possibly be, in Pennsylvania at least, the October surprise that Kamala Harris needs. Because remember, if she wins Pennsylvania by even just a few votes, that gives her a big leg up to the White House.
To think the opening act at Madison Square Garden ends up being the October surprise, a forced error, as a lot of people have said.
Absolutely.
Speak to the contrast, though, of these two candidates. We've already framed where Donald Trump is and what he's up to. Tyler Kendall helped to frame what's happening on the Mall. That's a very familiar-looking view. Remember Donald Trump standing in that very spot on January 6th. A lot of folks thought that Kamala Harris should be projecting a more forward-looking message, a more optimistic one, rather than bringing us back to a very troubling day in our history. What do you think?
Well, it depends. We'll have to see what she actually does tonight. They did say in a press call earlier today that she was going to do exactly that. She couldn't ignore the elephant in the room and ignore the Madison Square Garden rally. She's already talked about it quite a bit. And she does want to remind people, especially those independents and centrist Republicans, that, you know, he is a danger, that she believes he's a danger to democracy and all of that. But once again, people know that. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. And given in the absence of a plan, people will vote for a bad plan. So she really needs to get the speech. We saw excerpts, that show that she does talk about how awful she thinks Donald Trump is at the beginning, and she talks about that she'll be good for America at the end. What I'm waiting for is to hear the middle part, where she needs to give, as they promised they would do, a forward-looking, detailed economic and immigration plan. She needs to get that out in these final days for the people who haven't yet already made their decision, as tens of millions have. Well,
we'll be hearing a lot more about this. Put a finer point on the message this evening when we speak later this hour with Ian Sams, Kamala Harris's campaign spokesman. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, thank you so much for setting us up for that conversation. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont offering support to Harris through the lens of the war between Israel and Hamas last night on social media. Listen.
Some of you are saying, how can I vote for Kamala Harris if she is supporting this terrible war? And that is a very fair question. And let me give you my best answer. And that is that even on this issue, Donald Trump and his right-wing friends are worse.
This comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu holds a meeting this evening with Lebanese officials to reach a diplomatic solution. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Dan Flatley from our national security team here in Washington. Dan, it's great to have you. There is news that Netanyahu says he's open to a very short-term truce. We're talking 2 days, as suggested by Egypt, in return for what I believe at this point is still 4 hostages. Is this a real issue on the table?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, Israel needs to be able to show, and Netanyahu needs to be able to show that they are willing to negotiate, but that they're going to do it in exchange for something that they need and want very badly, which is the return of some of the hostages. So I think that it signals an opening rather than it being some sort of conclusive deal that is going to, solve the fighting, obviously. But it does seem to suggest that we are getting to a place where Netanyahu feels that he can begin to negotiate, begin to have these discussions, not just with respect to Gaza, but also with respect to Lebanon as well. And we did see some commentary out of the Israeli government today that the campaign in Lebanon may end toward the end of the year or may begin to wrap up. So it's an interesting mix of signals. And obviously we had the response, the Israeli response to the Iranian strike, an Israeli strike on Iran over the weekend. So things are moving a little bit at a time, but certainly an interesting mix, a little bit different from where we were a week or two ago on this particular issue.
Well, to your point, it was the Israeli finance minister who was giving a press briefing regarding the 2025 budget, and he said the war with Hezbollah should be over by the end of December before we reach 2025. So it does make you wonder how the financial considerations are factoring into Israel's calculus. All that said, if we do see an end to the conflict with Hezbollah, does that not go immediately back to the conflict with Hamas, knowing Hezbollah said it's acting in support of Hamas and in protest of the ongoing war in Gaza?
Yeah, there's so many different things that have to happen in this region, obviously, for there to be a cessation of fighting as we might think of, as a region-wide ceasefire. I think the Gaza issue is very different from what's happening in Lebanon because you still have those hostages out there. Yeah. You still have a lot of damage, obviously, to the area, to the physical infrastructure in Gaza. You have lingering questions about what will happen after the Israelis withdraw, how far they will withdraw, will they maintain some sort of a security perimeter. So there's many more unanswered questions when it comes to the Gaza issue than with Lebanon, which was always meant to be, or at least seemed to be, a very limited campaign. To the point about the finance minister, it's interesting. I read that comment with a lot of interest because it does seem to indicate where this campaign is going. And certainly when you have a war, you have to pay for it. So that's an important aspect to this. On the other hand, you can't really say a war is going to end at a specific date. It's just not how these things work. So I think it's an indication, it's a signal. Whether it actually means that, December 31st, 2024, the campaign in Lebanon will end and the campaign in Gaza will end shortly thereafter, I don't think we can say that. But it's definitely interesting. And, of course, the election here in the United States coming up next week could play into that as well.
All right, Bloomberg's Dan Flatley, thank you so much. And still ahead, speaking of the election next week, we'll be joined by Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri for his thoughts next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
With me, we got to get the congressmen elected and we got to get the senators elected because we can take the Senate pretty easily. And I think with our little secret, we're going to do really well with the House, right? Our little secret is having a big impact. He and I have a secret. We'll tell you what it is when the race is over.
That was Donald Trump during his rally at Madison Square Garden this past Sunday, alluding to a secret between him and House Speaker Mike Johnson. Joining us now on Bloomberg TV and radio is a member of the Republican conference in the House, Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri. Congressman, thank you for being here on Balance of Power. You are actually the first member of the conference we've been able to speak with on air since Donald Trump made these remarks. Do you have any idea what the secret is?
I do. I've got a little secret, and I'll tell you what that is. I know Donald Trump's secret with Mike Johnson because Mike Johnson just texted me. I told him I was going to do this interview. The secret is a series of Tele-Town halls. President Trump, when he met with us at the Capitol Hill Club some months back, it was a great team meeting between the House members and President Trump, and then he later had one with the Senate. This is something that President Trump did last election cycle, and he is going to up his game even more so this cycle, to have Tele-Town halls with at-risk seats, members who are trying desperately to get back to Congress to increase our majority in the House, because Lord knows the slim majority that we have right now is not working. And these Tele-Town halls have been quite effective. I think it shows the tenacity, the tone and tenor that this president wants to set to touch people personally, to talk to them on the phone. The 45th president of the United States doing Tele-Town halls.
Wow. So I guess you're making news here, Congressman. Thank you for reaching out to the speaker ahead of our conversation. Why would Tele-Town halls have to be a secret? Isn't that the normal way of doing business?
Well, I think it's very uncommon for a former president and future president to do Tele-Town halls in the number that he is attempting to do this. It's going to be in the dozens of calls. And I remember Trump saying this now a couple of months ago, that he is going to work overtime well into the night to make sure that we increase our majority in the House. And, of course, Mike Johnson, the leadership team, Steve Scalise, Tom Emmert, everyone is excited that President Trump is on board. And we are working as a well-oiled machine to increase our majority in the House.
Well, when we consider your majority in the House, that will be decided potentially as soon as next Tuesday, although those results may take a little bit longer to tally in some of these majority-making states like California and New York. If, though, you do not keep the majority, if it turns into the minority, is Speaker Johnson still going to be your leader? What will happen in the leadership elections that take place a week after Election Day?
Well, Kaylee, I certainly appreciate the question, but I'm not going to play what ifs because that is not going to happen. We are on track to pick up 5 to 7 seats in our estimation. The polling looks good, even in some of the seats up in New York where Joe Biden won last year, and we got some Republican congressmen and women out of that. They're going to be returning. We are out campaigning. I'm joining Steve Scalise later this week on the campaign trail. I'm in a safe district here in Missouri. And so this is a team sport. We are going to take an even greater majority in the U.S. House. We're going to take back the Senate. Trump is going to be in the White House. And then you're going to see a great deal of action come January 20th, even really before then, as we begin to plan to renew the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and other things that we can do for the American people.
Your support for the former president is duly noted, Congressman. I want to ask you about what happens when you come back to work later on this year, because we spent weeks and weeks talking about the continuing resolution that got us this far, at least, in funding the government. You're writing at the Hill, the real monster this Halloween. We'll deal with the first holiday we're going to be coming up on here, our national debt and a dysfunctional Congress. You talk about the fact that the House passed 5 of the 12 appropriations bill, defense, homeland security, and more, but the Senate passed 0 bills. So in your construct here for Halloween, if the national debt and a dysfunctional Congress are the real monsters, is Chuck Schumer the boogeyman?
He may be Dracula because he is sucking everything out of how Congress should work with his intransigence and the way that he is stopping bills from moving forward, including H.R. 2, the Secure Border Act, which hadn't seen the light of day over in the Senate. Look, it's dysfunctional because the Senate is not doing its job. We have passed more than 70% of funding for the federal government. This time last year, we had only 1 appropriations bill off the U.S. House floor. This year, we have 5. It's an improvement, not where it should be, but we are making great strides under the leadership of the Appropriations Committee, Tom Cole, to make sure that we are operating in regular order. And my hope is that for Christmas, we can deliver for the American people, getting the remaining of these appropriation bills done, and most importantly, give President Trump a clear pathway as he takes off in his new administration, that we can get these things done in the first 100 days, which are so important.
I'd like to ask you about something in your state specifically, Congressman, because Missouri also has a reproductive health measure on the ballot this November that would enshrine abortion into the state constitution. We spoke with the mayor of St. Louis, Tashora Jones, about this earlier this month. This is what she told us, and I'll have you respond.
Missouri is a little unique in that Amendment 3 is actually polling ahead. So we totally expect Amendment 3 to pass. But unfortunately, Missourians will elect Republicans to lead our state who will do everything in their power to try to turn those gains back.
If this measure passes, Congressman, if it's the will of the people of Missouri to enshrine abortion rights into the Constitution, should that be pulled back?
Should it what?
Should that be reversed by the state legislature? Would you encourage Republicans in that legislature to let it stand?
Well, we have a very unique, I don't know, very unique, but it's a little bit different process here, the initiative petition, where we can get things on our Constitution rather easily with a minimum number of signatures. This is the reason it got on as Amendment 3 here in the state of Missouri. We're going to vote on it. And the mayor of St. Louis is correct. I've heard of polling recently as today that it is ahead slightly, but there's still about 14% undecided on this. And I think when they get the true message of what this bill is about, it's written in such weird language that it could conceivably include transgender surgeries for minors, abortions for minors without consent by their parents or guardians, and abortions up until birth, which I think even the most reasoned, rational Democrat or independent might think that that's gone a bit too far. So we'll see what happens. We're getting the word out. We're having a big rally on Saturday in regards to this. Lamar Hunt Jr., part owner of the Chiefs, is going to be there. We have got to let people know the truth about Amendment 3 and defeat it soundly.
Well, abortions to birth has never been advocated that we're aware of, Congressman. But I want to ask you about an important committee assignment you have on agriculture. Are we going to get a farm bill in the lame duck?
That's why I'm wearing this green tie, Joe. It is my hopeful tie that we are going to get it done. And we were successful in getting over 100 signatures of my fellow Republicans sent to the leadership before we left to come back to work in district for the elections to get this farm bill on the floor. We have a limited number of days. I understand that. I'm going to be pressing Steve Scalise and the leadership to get it on the floor. It's so important to our farmers and producers to make sure that they have the safety nets that they need to. I talk to farmers every day. I talked to one yesterday who's thinking about, after 3 generations, selling the farm because the input costs are so high because of what this administration has done with this war on fossil fuels. It's raised the prices of fuel and fertilizer, and it's untenable for farmers right now. And our food security is national security. This farm bill also raises the food stamp program, or the SNAP program, by $295 million. The Democrats are trying to tell you it's cutting the programs. We are bringing accountability to the program, but there's $33 million a day in waste, abuse, and fraud in SNAP. And if anyone's truly hungry in the greatest nation known to man and they cannot work, we should be helping them.
Well, come back and talk to us when this becomes a real debate again in Washington. Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri, thank you, sir, for joining us here on Bloomberg. Coming up, Citadel's Ken Griffin's opinion on what he expects from the outcome of the presidential election. Said it out loud. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. During a panel at Saudi Arabia's Future Investment Initiative Summit today, Citadel's Ken Griffin shared what he expects from the results of the election.
The expectation today is that Donald Trump will win the White House in just a few days. We'll know shortly. And big picture, the reduction in uncertainty is almost always positive for asset prices. And we're at that moment of peak uncertainty. It is a race that Trump is favored to win, but it's almost a coin toss.
We should note that Ken Griffin has donated $100 million to pro-Republican political action committees in this election cycle, according to Campaign Finance Monitor Open Secrets. Pretty remarkable, though, to hear him say it out loud, Kaylee, because we've heard this quite a bit on this program here on Bloomberg. Wall Street seems to think it has this campaign figured out, even though the polls are literally tied.
Yeah, the betting markets seem to think otherwise, and certainly you're hearing it from some investors in Saudi Arabia. I would point out Elon Musk also appeared at FII talking about getting to Mars. He said he's more optimistic about it under the Trump White House than a non-Trump White House, maybe a window into why he's being so supportive of the former president.
Always fascinating. Every day. Coming up, we're joined by Ian Sams. We're going to bring you back to the National Mall. Senior spokesman for the Harris-Walz campaign ahead of the speech tonight on the Ellipse. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
One of the biggest cell phones and self-inflicted October surprises ever might have happened at Madison Square Garden. Why don't we present a vision of goodness, right? A future, a message that says, hey, we can go forward from this. We are not this. And I think that's where she's going now. And again, you got to be able to flex. You know, I've been in a couple campaigns. I think you got to be able to flex to what your opponent is doing. And if your opponent is destroying themselves, I think you start to present that positive message, your economic outlook, and how you can differentiate yourself from somebody like Donald Trump.
Former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman of Virginia, now a member of Republicans for Harris, with us on the early edition of Balance of Power. And here with us now on the late edition on Bloomberg TV and radio is our political panel. Ashley Davis, founding partner at Westfront Strategies and Republican strategist, alongside Kevin Walling, vice president at HG Creative and Democratic strategist. Welcome to you both as we beat the drum here to what will take place an hour and a half from now. Dueling speeches, Donald Trump in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where, mind you, there is a heavy concentration of Puerto Ricans especially, and Kamala Harris here in Washington, D.C. at the Ellipse, the site of the speech on January 6, 2021, given by Donald Trump. Kevin, what I'm struggling to understand is for all this talk of her campaign about a new way forward, about not going back, why bring us here for closing arguments to something that happened back 4 years ago?
Well, I think the focus from the campaign, I was on a few calls with the campaign where they were previewing the vice president's speech tonight, is more so about not necessarily the parallels to January 6th, but the optics of her in front of the White House, right? You still have a number of voters in this country that still, for whatever reason, don't picture the first woman, president sitting in that Oval Office. And I think a week out from the election, they want to drive home the narrative that she is a tough, tested, ready on day one commander-in-chief, and I think the imagery of the White House behind her will deliver that message clearly, again, 1 week out from Election Day.
Both are being criticized for muddling their closing arguments. I think we just illustrated what some of the concern is about Kamala Harris. Some would suggest she shouldn't even be anywhere near Washington. The optics are wrong. You should be in a swing state delivering this speech. Donald Trump playing cleanup from Madison Square Garden in what is, to Kaylee's point, a majority Latino city. Purportedly protesters waiting for him. We know they closed schools today. We're talking about everything but policy.
Well, exactly. I think that's the biggest takeaway from what happened, besides obviously it's horrific and it's wrong. But the campaign did go away from that comment from the comedian right away. But it doesn't matter. The problem is that's the talk right now to everybody. And you don't want to be a week out from the election talking about something the comedian said, the two people before you on stage. So I think that and he should be talking about the economy. He should be talking about immigration. I do have a colleague that is there at the rally, and there's not a major protesting issue right now. I think they'll have that pretty buttoned up, especially with him, with everything that's going on. Sure. Yeah. But again, Joe, I mean, you're exactly right. Both of them aren't really talking about what they want to be talking about today.
Well, and neither are their running mates, perhaps. J.D. Vance, while campaigning in Wisconsin, had this response to people who were offended by the comments that were made about Puerto Rico.
My own view on this is, look, again, I haven't seen the joke. Maybe it's a stupid racist joke, as you said. Maybe it's not. I haven't seen it. I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the joke. But I think that we have to stop getting so offended at every little thing in the United States of America. I'm so over it.
So if that was J.D. Vance yesterday, Ashley, fast forward to Trump tonight. What should he be saying differently or similarly to what his running mate is saying?
I think he probably has to acknowledge the fact, again, that if this was not a positive comment, he doesn't believe in it. But then I do think that he's going to have to pivot and start talking about other issues, because this could suck the air out of the room for the next 3 days if he lets it. But again, I mean, he's not talking about the issues that he should be talking about. But also, there's supposedly going to be an endorsement today from the shadow senator in Puerto Rico who's going to endorse him. We'll see if that happens. So, I mean, they're obviously, again, playing cleanup, what you don't want to be doing.
We're going to hear more about the to-do list, we're told, tonight from Kamala Harris, who's contrasting that with what she calls an enemies list that Donald Trump is keeping. She actually tweeted that to-do list on Friday to get specifics. Some of the ordering, some of the choices on that list, seeing legalizing marijuana in the top 10, kind of a surprise. We didn't realize it was that high of a priority. Kevin, what should she be highlighting tonight as we look forward? That's the point, right?
Well, certainly all the elements of that with regards to the middle class, right? She's been out on the campaign trail hammering tax cuts for those folks making under $400,000, $6,000 tax credits for parents in this country, $25,000, $50,000 new home, small business. So I think making that appeal to the middle class and basing this as a twofold argument, right? We're not going back to Donald Trump, but the optics from the Ellipse. And here's my proactive list of things I want to do for the American people. For many people, she's still introducing herself 1 week out from this election. And again, as we talked about last week, the debate I don't think is between Donald Trump and Vice President Harris at this point. It's really about the couch or Vice President Harris, the couch or Donald Trump in terms of base engagement, making the case to the American people and turn those folks out.
Do you think that? I'm sorry. Do you think the to-do list is like going after the women? I mean, because women always have their to-do list. I mean, I think that was very creative. I really do. And then I also think this is her answer that she didn't answer during the interview, which was, what are you going to do day one? I mean, I think this is...
Referencing her very first sit-down with CNN.
Yes.
Dana Bash joint with Tim Walz, when she didn't have an answer to what would happen first day in the White House. Has she ironed that out?
I think
at this point, Kevin?
And Ashley makes a really good point. I think one of the initial hits on her campaign was that there were no specifics, there were no plans. she's making the case again this week out, releasing that to-do list. Here's what I'm going to do from day one. You know what my policies are. You know what my priorities are, especially for the middle class. And you contrast that with, I watched the rambling kind of 2-hour speech from Mar-a-Lago. I think he hit some good points in terms of immigration and crime, but it was kind of all over the place. She's very focused, and she's going to be that focused candidate at the Ellipse tonight.
He also didn't answer any questions at that press conference.
That's correct.
That it was held.
We've had a couple of those.
Yeah.
The press not terribly involved in the conference.
It's the press monologue.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's true.
Exactly right.
Why isn't Joe Biden invited tonight? They're right there in front of the White House to see.
I'm glad you asked Ashley.
Yeah, might need to hear from
you've seen over the last couple of days that he does want to participate in some of the campaigns, and I think that. Listen, if you do say that the country is going in the wrong direction the last 4 years, you're not going to want to bring out the person. She's trying to distance herself away from him as much as she can, I would think. I hear that he may go on the road for some of the Senate candidates, which makes sense. But maybe he'll make.
Is that just life for the incumbent?
Well, and I think to Ashley's point, he was on the road in Maryland today with Angela Alsabrook. He was in an interesting race against Larry Hogan.
Sure.
He's got an event tonight with Voto Latino, I think a virtual event. So he is doing campaign events. But certainly this is the vice president's campaign. She's got to make the case that, she's not a Biden 2.0, but she's her own candidate. I think the best way to do that is that speech tonight in front of the White House.
Well, so as we consider, though, Biden spending time not just focused on this presidential race, but the down-ballot races as well, how should we be using, as we talk about these tightening polls in the presidential race, the tightening we're seeing in Senate polls specifically for some of these Democratic incumbents as a guide to where this race actually stands, Ashley?
I think there's a couple dynamics that I'm really watching. The fact that the Ohio candidate, Sherrod Brown, in fact, in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, we have Democrat incumbents that are doing TV ads with Donald Trump featured or saying that they did something with Donald Trump is a concern. Wisconsin, they've already done, Tester's already done that, as well as West Virginia. That doesn't really matter. So if you're having these tight races in the Senate, be pro-Trump in some of their campaign ads, there's trouble. I mean, I was on the call today with the NRSC. I think they're feeling pretty good. I don't know that if it's going to be 51 or 53 or 50-50, but I think obviously they feel it's trending in the right direction. And I think we'll know quickly in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Well, I don't know quickly.
I was going to say, define quickly for us, please. We all want to know.
Quickly, maybe not a week.
Less than a week? We'll buy that. We had a fascinating conversation earlier today with the Secretary of State of North Carolina, looking at areas ravaged by a hurricane where people are actually keeping up with the clip in 2020 when it comes to early voting. More than 3.1 million people there, a third of voters in North Carolina, have already made up their minds. To what extent are you guys watching this and factoring that into some of the noise? They're messaging these campaigns knowing a third of the nation has already decided.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all speaks to the operation that you build, right? And a really effective operation, Ashley knows as well, you're constantly taking out folks that have already voted and putting resources behind districts, places, personalities, genders, demographics that are still out there.
Do you worry as a Democrat, though, that Republicans are outpacing their record in the past
I don't
year?
worry necessarily. I think it's a good thing, number one, that we're seeing this level of engagement. I think that speaks volumes. Hopefully, when more people vote, I think it's a better thing naturally for the Democratic Party. We see that obviously in the difference with the popular vote. But listen, she's going to North Carolina tomorrow. I think you have some Republicans out there saying that Georgia and North Carolina are trending away from the vice president's campaign. I think you're seeing they have internals that paint a different picture, which is why she's going to be down there tomorrow, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina tomorrow, and then she's out to Nevada and Arizona on Thursday, again, hitting those key constituencies. But again, it's all about the ground operation at this point.
So this is a final question for you both as we consider this last week of the campaign here. For each of your respective candidates, Ashley, I'll come to you first on Donald Trump. What is the one thing, the one message, phrase, whatever it is, that he needs to hammer home?
Well, it would be very nice, and remember my candidate was Nikki Haley. I think it would be very nice if he would stop the negativity, stop the criticism, talk about his policies. He has a really good message on the economy. Most people believe he's better on the economy. He polls higher than her all the time. And instead of talking about the border in a negative way, talking about how he's going to fix it besides the rhetoric that he uses. I think that would go a long way.
Well, Kevin?
To Ashley's point, we've got to hammer home the economy, right? We've won the argument when it comes to reproductive rights, I think, in turning out our base of support there. But she's got to, again, get those folks off the couch. And an economic argument is likely going to be that motivating factor. We've cut into the deficit in terms of outpolling with the economy and Donald Trump over the vice president. But we've got to hammer that home in the last week.
Both parties still arguing with the couch. Kevin Walling, Ashley Davis, great conversation. Always a great panel. Thank you so much for the insights on another important night here on the Trail with 1 week to go. Coming up, we're joined by Democratic strategist Brad Howard ahead of the vice president's remarks tonight on the Ellipse. We'll have much more ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The secret is a series of Tele-Town halls. President Trump, when he met with us at the Capitol Hill Club some months back, it was a great team meeting between the House members and President Trump, and then he later had one with the Senate. This is something that President Trump did last election cycle, and he is going to up his game even more so this cycle, to have Tele-Town halls with at-risk seats, members who are trying desperately to get back to Congress to increase our majority in the House, because Lord knows the slim majority that we have right now is not working.
Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri talking with us just a bit earlier this hour, discussing how the Harris campaign might be adjusting strategies following fallout from Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden. But to get to the point of what he was referring to is news that he just made earlier this hour. The so-called secret that Donald Trump said he had with Speaker Mike Johnson apparently were this series of Tele-Town halls. Joining us now is Brad Howard, Democratic strategist, founder of the Corcoran Street Group. Brad, it's good to see you. Welcome back. Your thoughts on this? The congressman seemed to think this would be very impactful, maybe a game changer in a tied-up presidential race. What do you think?
So I've been a communications director for a member of Congress, chief of staff for another member of Congress, and the spokesperson for the Blue Dog Coalition. Very familiar with telephone town halls. It is a older technology, but it's a way of engaging folks that may be homebound, and it's a great way of controlling the narrative, because what the secret that they're not telling you about these telephone town halls is they control who gets to ask the question. You have to vet the question first, and then it gets pushed through. So these are very controlled environments. It's great for a campaign, but you're targeting people with landlines. And so when you do that, you're limiting yourself to probably older, whiter voters. And so I would question, it's a great way to engage, but I would question that it really helps them pick up any new votes. And that has been Donald Trump's Achilles heel from the beginning, is that his only pathway to winning is to denigrate his opponent and to drive up these low propensity voters across the United States. And that's a very difficult thing. And I think he's experiencing that every time he inches further to the right to try to sweep in more of these low propensity voters, he is hurting himself with high propensity voters who are more moderate, say that what I call the Chamber of Commerce Republicans, the Liz Cheneys of the world. Yeah. And so it's a game of math when you run campaigns. And I think he is doubling down on this strategy that is closing the number of opportunities he has to get to 270.
Well, let's talk about Kamala Harris's opportunities to get to 270, Brad, as we're about to hear her at 7 p.m. Eastern time speaking from the Ellipse, the site of January 6, 2021 Trump's speech before his supporters stormed the Capitol. She is going to say, according to excerpts released from the campaign, that Donald Trump is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power. If this is about getting low propensity voters out, does that kind of messaging accomplish that for her?
So she's got a different situation. She's going after high propensity voters that have voted 3 or 4 times in the last 4 elections, who are moderate Republicans who are undecided in this election. There is a very small but specific audience there that she can win over. This is why you're seeing her toss out Liz Cheney. The Trump folks make fun of Liz Cheney, saying she has no following in the Republican Party, which is just blatantly false. The Mitt Romneys, the Liz Cheneys of the world are up for grabs. And in the first time in modern American history, she has a chance to grab reliable Republican voters and win them into her column. And so what we have seen from her is a very targeted persuasion campaign that is targeted at this very small set of voters. At the same time, she's got the added problem when she took over the nomination, she had to also consolidate her base while doing that strategy. She has done the base consolidation beautifully. This is why you see her with Beyonce. It's why you see Usher at rallies. It's why you see Eminem appearing in Detroit. She's rallying together her base and motivating them. She's got a dual strategy here. She still has opportunities to increase the number of persuadable voters that can vote for her, while also increasing the number of high partisans but low propensity voters on college campuses around the country. And keep in mind, the last time college campuses voted, they weren't physically there. And so we're seeing a surge on campuses throughout Michigan, throughout Wisconsin, where young voters are excited and fired up about this election because she's been able to take her momentum out of the political lane and put it into the cultural lane. And so you're seeing pop artists and rap artists and celebrities who are helping draft this young people, a very Obama-like movement towards Kamala and making sure they vote and that they know what's at stake. And what you're going to see tonight, I think, is the merging of those two efforts. She's going to remind voters what's at stake here, your futures, your democracy, and kind of merge these arguments into one. And the slogan she is now using, which is a new way forward, is so smart because this election is not about change. I disagree with the premise that this is about change or status quo. What she's presenting is an election of choice. We can go back or we can go forward. There's an old way and a new way. The old way is Biden and Donald Trump. The new way is her. There's the backwards, which is Trump, forward, which is her. So a new way forward, I think, is a genius framing that reshifts the narrative of this race to choice.
Brad, we spoke earlier today on the early edition of Balance of Power with the head of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, who is out with new polling that throws some cold water in this idea that young men of color are flocking to Donald Trump. Here's what he told us.
This election isn't about the individual candidates. It's not even about the political parties. It's about the public policy priorities. And the more young African-American voters, particularly those who are under 50, get factual information about what's at stake, we're beginning to see a shift, a gradual shift towards Vice President Harris.
What they found in this case, black men under 50 years old, as Derek Johnson says, decreased their likelihood of voting for Donald Trump from 27 to 21% since a previous survey asking the very same question last month. He suggests, as some have on this program, that this is a media narrative. What do you think?
So I think what Trump is saying and what you just heard the NAACP, I think can both factually be correct. I think in the universe of likely voters that black men are trending in her column of the black male audience that is a likely voter. What Trump is trying to do is excite the black men in this country who have never voted or voted maybe once in the last 4 years and try to get them out to vote. And so there is the black community is really in the next 10 to 30 years going to, as their parents and their grandparents' generation who face discrimination, these civil rights struggles, as the new generation takes over, the identity is less strong as a racial identity. And you start to see young black folks care more about being progressive than necessarily voting just because someone is black. And so there's the partisanship is going to change a little bit in the black community over the next 10 to 30 years.
All right, Brad Howard, founder of Corcoran Street Group, thank you for joining us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. We're just about an hour away from the scheduled start of the closing argument address that Kamala Harris will deliver from the Ellipse on the National Mall, set to take the stage shortly here as part of her closing pitch that will be focused on January 6th. Kaylee, no mystery as we look at this image. The last time most Americans saw a podium set up here with the flags, the ballistic glass, Donald Trump was speaking in that spot on January 6th, 2021.
Yeah, amazing to think back on what happened almost 4 years ago as he is running in yet another cycle. And he, of course, himself will also be making competing remarks tonight. At the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, he will be in Allentown, Pennsylvania, a town with a high Puerto Rican population, which, of course, we'll be watching to see how he addresses the remarks made by other speakers at his Madison Square Garden rally over this weekend. We are in the final stretch of the campaign here. Starting tomorrow, we'll be less than a week away from Election Day, and that's why these messages are so crucially important.
As the early vote continues to gather steam, we'll have a lot more on this when we come back tomorrow.
And, of course, we'll have more coverage in the Washington edition newsletter. You can find that on the terminal and online. And we'll see you for the Wednesday edition. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.